You're tuned into Economic and Political Weekly's new podcast show, Research Radio. We hope to bring academic rigor to ask and address complex questions. Our show lets you learn directly from researchers who are at the forefront of their fields. India runs one of the world's largest food security programs, and today we learn about how changes to the method in which food and grains reach beneficiaries can significantly increase people's access to food. I'm your host Abhishek, and I'm joined with two researchers who surveyed 1,600 households to understand which method of delivering food and grains can work best: direct cash transfers, the existing public distribution system, or food coupons. They'll share their findings based on research they published in EPW last October. Dr. Mamta Pradhan has over 14 years of experience in the field of development, where she's focused largely on nutrition and public health. Dr. Devesh Roy has over 17 years of experience in the fields of food security, agriculture, and trade. Dr. Vinay Sonkar is the third author for this research but was unable to join us for this podcast. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Pradhan and Dr. Roy.
Thank you, Abhishek. Thank you for having us for this initiative.
Thank you. Would you like to start by telling us about what made you interested in researching about food security, and specifically about the experiences and needs of those who rely on food security schemes?
India has this largest footprints of the food security programs in the whole world. I mean, if you look at our National Food Security Act, it has the footprint of even providing for subsidized grains to almost about 800 million people. And the scale that it is being done it's quite staggering. But in spite of all these efforts, there has been in trying to ensure all this food security, starting from the period of the pre-grain revolution, the food security concerns or the lot of effort that has been put. At the end of the day, I mean, what we argue is that the performance or the delivery has been really, really subpar. So what goes on to explain all that, this gap? And I mean, a lot of research has been done. I mean, in terms of, there has been arguments counter arguments talking about what would be the possible reasons behind this, why what has been promised and what has been delivered has been so subpar. So but everybody in all the whole body of the research or the discourse in the policy space has always been talked about is from the supply side, in terms of what is the government design, in terms of the program, what is delivered, what are the mechanisms of it. But there was one big element, the whole issue about the demand side, in terms of how the system is managed, how it is delivered, whether it is in sync with what is optimal for the beneficiaries in terms of what do they want, what do they desire, what are their preferences. And that we thought would be the first order implication to what these outcomes would be when it is related to the food security. So the idea is that we kind of what motivated us is that there is a lot of mismatch between what is being provided for and what is being delivered. And when there is a mismatch, when there's a misalignment, between what is promised and what is being delivered, there will always be leakages in the system. There will always be corruption in the system. So the uptake of the program will always be, compromised. So, and when you asked us specifically about what has been the experiences and needs of those who rely on this food security system, that's exactly the crux of our research, experiences and needs of these people, the beneficiaries or the rights holder, for whom all these programs is made, that matters. They bear on the preferences, they bear on how do they want to take up the program. So we have to internalize that the experiences and needs of these beneficiaries matter if we really are looking at an outcome which is optimal for these beneficiaries.
Your research makes use of several methods, including surveys, interviews, and focus group discussions. What went behind conceptualizing the research process?
When we were really conceptualizing our research, we really had to then rely on the mixed methods. It's both quantitative and the qualitative methods, the combination of both these research methods, because we knew that when we have to analyze these needs at such a granular level, quantitative methods, has necessitates it to be very brief. It has to be very close-ended questions and the responses too. So that's where the qualitative actually helps in terms of kind of getting us this whole range of information about the class and the local power relations that we found that cannot be actually captured in the quantitative data. So qualitative actually brought all this more nuanced and very subtle analysis of this whole role of class and local power relations in engagement with the PDS. And also that these methods were sequentially done so that one method actually kind of informed the use of the second.
And how did you investigate the role that power relations, especially based on identity, play in people's access to the PDS?
All the reservations, whether of the dealership or across all the, whether it's the mukhya or the sarpanch. So the reservations are based either on the caste or the gender, right? So what happened was in qualitative, when we went through the field, the shared caste bit, the advantage of being sharing the same caste, we thought would mitigate a lot of factors around discrimination, but that didn't seem to be happening. So what we discovered was that this whole bonding actually happens more at the subcaste level, at the jati level. So, right, whether you're a Yadav or not, even if you're an OBC, but in OBC, there are like maybe 200 or 300 subcastes to that. So, how it works, the power relations is more at the jati level. But what we are doing, it's always at the superficial level of the social group level, which actually doesn't pan out in the field. And more interestingly, in Bihar especially, there was this whole one village, which was the Yadav village, used to be called as the Yadav village. So Yadav is the new upper caste, the OBC, right, in Bihar. So even that changes, right? The whole concept about caste being of a certain, group doesn't hold now, even if you are one of this dominant caste, so they are kind of now the upper caste. So in Bihar, it is more of the Yadavs. So the whole village was a Yadav village. So, and the dealer was an OBC. The whole village, almost 90% of the population was OBC. Yet it was one of the worst performing PDS shops. And when I stayed in that village for a while, it took me a while to discover why kind of this is happening, considering that we have a dealer who is an OBC and the whole of this population seems to be OBC. It should work, right? So I was surprised to find that it's not even at the jati level. It actually works at the clan level. What's the gotra level? What's your gotra? So those people who were of the same clan as that of the dealer seemed to get a more of a preferential treatment than those who were not. So do you see at what granular level all this, the caste factors works? So it kind of really threw this whole idea about, whole idea of whatever this established affirmative action that we have been talking about for all this while, it went for a toss. So the complexity, that's why when I said in the beginning, the heterogeneity in India especially, it takes a very complex forms. And especially in terms of the caste, it just does not work at the social group level. At the most, we can go to the level of the subcaste level, the jati level. But if you really want to go to the deeper, you will find that even doesn't function at the jati level. It kind of functions at the clan level, the gotra level.
Apart from the fact that this happens at that granular level of a jati, that's one thing. But the second part is that whichever level it happens, you still have to get the incentives right? So there is no reason to believe that if you get someone from your same caste or caste group or jati, unless you get, the incentives right in terms of, if they are going to be penalized for diverting your grains, if they are penalized for not delivering on the grains on time or whatever, then only this thing is going to work. As long as the enforcement of such things are not there, it really attenuates the effect of any affirmative action that you'll have at that level. Because, if through that reservation or through that affirmative action, we get woman dealer in the fair price shop. But unless you have the incentives right, you'll still find the same outcomes, because even people from the same caste will not get the grains on time, because if he or she has the system set up to divert the grains, independent of caste, independent of social identity, that would still work, because you don't have the incentives right. And that's what we see in our research.
What I found was when it's reserved for a certain caste, once they are in that position, they tend to behave as the upper caste. And the incentive to siphon off all these grains is so much that even the caste doesn't matter there. So, I mean, my incentive as a dealer to sell off and make some more money is higher than all these reasons around why I should be even be more giving you preferential treatment because we are of the same caste. So he's right about the incentive, like there has to be the right incentive for even for the shared caste to function. Besides being of all this whole issue of the jati group or the clan.
The arbitrage opportunities have only gone up with NFSA because now the differential between the PDS price and the market price has even gone much larger, right? We began to see the signs of those perverse incentives coming up when you are moving towards NFSA because now the wedge between the PDS price and the market price is so much larger.
It's not that if I'm entitled to 5 kg of rice, and if I'm of the same clan or gotra, maybe I'll end up getting at least 3 kgs. But if I'm not of that same, even I may end up getting just 1 kg. It's all a relative term in terms of how the preferential treatment really pans out, right?
In our notes from the field segment, we'd like to learn about two particularly insightful experiences you had while implementing your research plan.
So when I was in the field and you see so much of discrimination, especially women, I mean, they are at the frontiers, when it just comes to the access of periods. There's so much of access issues in terms of they are made to wait. There will be an abusive dealer, so they have to be a long line. And what I found was a lot of them kept quiet, and there was no action against the dealer or against. There's no complaint. There was no grievance redressal mechanism. They did kind of make use of that. And on the face of it, it really seemed very irrational, and we couldn't just rationalize as to why there is so much of silence, why there is so much of inaction. So this longer stay in the field made me realize is this is all their coping strategy in terms of how do they really access their entitlement. So there was this whole trade-off between really managing the current endowment and that the long-term entitlement. So if I don't want to come under the spotlight, and be seen that she's the troublemaker, so even if I get my entitlement in the short run, in the long term, and I lose out on that. So whole this inaction or not being responsive to all these abuses or the discrimination or all these access issues was actually the part of their coping strategy. So that was the third revelation, because we keep complaining. I mean, I keep hearing from all this, in the policy discourse that beneficiaries should be talking about this. We have introduced a grievance redressal mechanism. They should be making use of it. It's not that easy. Because at that village level, they have to deal with all those local politics, to survive that, to ensure whatever they're entitled to, at least in some form. May not be in the whole full form of whatever they're supposed to get, but at least in some bit, they ensure it. And so all this inaction or, all this silence is nothing but their coping strategy. I didn't see any collective action happening. And that's also part of a coping strategy. Like they preferred what we call it as strategic waiting. They'll wait for one person to take some action and then they will join the bandwagon to really talk about it. Or you need an external stimuli, because there was in one case in Orissa where an NGO actually kind of intervened. So when the people came forward, but left to themselves, probably in their own world, they would still rely on being not very responsive to any kind of discriminatory behavior.
And can you tell me about beneficiaries' experience with the redressal system?
In the whole value chain, you see, right from the block level to the state level, things don't get heard. Like that's the truth. That's the reality. And look at spending the whole day in going to the complaint about, whatever the 2 kg or 3 kgs rice. So there's this whole wage they lose out. I mean, most of them are wage laborers. So why would they even go to that extent of, putting in a whole day or 2 day to go and complain about just a 2 kg or 3 kg rice when they have to really compromise on a lot of other things? So there are a whole lot of issues that really goes out in terms of why they don't take advantage of the grievance redressals. One, it doesn't work, right? And two, they have to give up a lot to even to complain for what they don't consider it is kind of really worth fighting for.
But one of the things that really follows from what Andres Leifer, the economist, he always called corruption as the greed in the system that make things work. And then there is this whole issue of that. So at the PDS, in the PDS system, you still need this some bit of corruption as the grease that really runs the system. So, for instance, as Mamta would always say that, it was totally socially acceptable that if the NFSA price is 2 rupees per kg for wheat, 3 rupees per kg for rice, they would be charged 3 rupees per kg for wheat and 4 rupees per kg for, so 1 rupee per kg more. And it was totally socially acceptable, and nobody would complain about that, right? And then the heterogeneity that Mamta was talking about, that really defied any chance of collective action, and that's where the granularity at which the heterogeneity works really matters. So you are getting hit on many different fronts, right? You're hit on prices because 1 rupee per kg, that might seem that okay, that's just a marginal addition, but then you're also being compromised on the entitlement in terms of quantity. So if you combine these two, effectively you're paying a much higher price. To the extent your entitlements are compromised on the quantity side, as well as you're paying a per unit price which is higher, your net effect is so much higher, and that's what we call as the effective price in our paper. Point is, in terms of all the reasons that Mamta was talking about, in terms of the coping strategy, this is, we used to use a term, it's this conditioned despotism, right? Despondency, that, you just are conditioned that nothing will happen because you have updated your beliefs over a long period of time. So no kind of resistance really comes up in the system, because the respondent, as Mamta would recall, would always say that no, there is no point of this system approaching a mukhya or approaching a grievance redressal system or go to a collectorate and so on, do it, because nothing is going to happen, because we know it as experience. When it comes to the delivery mechanism, they would say that would determine their preferences by looking at all the experiences that they had. So, Mamta, it was like basically what they would see in, say, Indra Awas Yojana, right? And they said that it will not come on time, the cash will not be delivered on time, and there is no redressal that works there. So, all these things are, it's kind of, in statistical terms, is kind of Bayesian updating of their beliefs and preferences, and all the coping mechanism that we really found in the system.
Another thing I wanted to add is that, I mean, the markers of discrimination is that Divesh talked about quantity and price. These two are very tangible, like you can see it, okay? And even if I wish to complain about it, it's fine. But how do you do that subtle discrimination in terms of the quality? Quality came up as a huge issue in the field. So if you are of a certain caste, the quality of rice that was given was very subpar, to the extent that I have personally seen it with all the pebbles and the cement and all that. And vis-a-vis, if you're of an upper caste, so the quality varies. So this is something, a discrimination which is very subtle, and I don't know how do I, as a beneficiary, would like to report it. If it were have to do a phone call to at the block level or at the upper level. So quality was one major, the subtle form of discrimination, and all these access issues. If I have to make to wait, how many hours, if I have abusive dealer. So all these are really major factors that determines your access. Quantity and price, people kind of have accepted it. A marginal rise of 1 or 2, or less than a 1 kg or 2 kg, people really don't mind about it. But what really hits them hard is actually the quality, especially for the women. They have to come back and then have to sort out those rice, and then have to prepare. So it ultimately comes on the woman at the end of the day, because the quality is so subpar. So, and that's the subtle kind of discrimination. And I don't know how do you go and report about it.
You've outlined some of the many challenges beneficiaries face in accessing food and grains. Can you tell me more about your findings about people's preferences?
So all along, what we found is that that's where this heterogeneity comes across 3 states. The preference was the diverse. I mean, it did vary, and it came from their experiences with PDS. Right. And for example, in Bihar, majority preferred cash and food coupons. Not to say that, there were not some who didn't prefer PDS, but the overriding factor was that they really wanted to have an alternative system which would minimize their interface with the dealer and really expand their choice set. So cash kind of gave them that kind of a sovereignty, in terms of really expanding their choice set. They can buy whatever the quality, the quantity they want from any shop. Same was with the food coupons or the food stamps, but not similar to what Bihar had done earlier. It is something akin to where you can redeem it at any grocery shop, not just at the PDS shop. So you see, the preference that we're saying is that one size fit for all kind of prescription is not what we are trying to give here. We want to say that you have to recognize that there is heterogeneity and we have to internalize it. And it varies by region to region. You can't just say it's cash that works. You can't just say it's the food stamp that works, or you can't just say that the in-kind transfer is what will work. It varies, and it varies from state to state, and you have to take cognizance of that. For example, in Orissa, the reasons why they didn't prefer cash was not because of any domestic abuse that the woman will face, and you will be surprised to know that almost 90% said that if you give us cash, women, they were saying, is that we will misuse it on tobacco and toddy. So do you see the reasons behind what their preferences goes out? And also in Orissa, we found that there is a credibility issue also. There was this Indira Awas Yojana where there is a housing subsidy that is given. So for most, it didn't work out for them. It's just that the power center changes. They had cash coming in for this housing schemes, and they had to pay commission to the bank officials. So for them, they had a total distrust about cash. PD is something they had been used to, right, in Orissa. So, if it's one rupee more or 2 rupees more or 1 kg less, at least they know that this system exists. Cash is something they're quite unfamiliar with. There's no infrastructure to it. They are not used to the banking system. There is a credibility issues also, which is kind of preceding their experiences. So all this makes what they prefer. So if you go to Orissa, they would prefer cash. They would still prefer PDs. If you come to Bihar and UP, there's an overwhelming, preference for cash or any alternative system. That's what the women said, that give us anything, just about anything, where it will limit our interface with the dealers. And they're so fed up, and they're so fed up with all the abusive nature that they're so fed up of, going through this rigmarole of every month being abused, standing in the line, waiting for hours and hours for their entitlements. They just want to have an alternative system. Give us anything but this. So that's how it kind of determines. So, whether it is cash, whether it's food stamps, whether it's PDs, it ultimately determines what the beneficiaries themselves want from it, right? And that again has a bearing on what experiences they have. So if there is an alignment, if their experience is good and there is an alignment with what your system is providing for, you will always have a better outcome. But if there is a misalignment, then things fall apart. If in Bihar, if you go and say PDS, their experience is so bad, even if you keep adding to that PDS, pulses or eggs or vegetables, you will see the outcome is always be subpar. So all along what we're trying to maintain is that, whole this debate about cash and kind, you cannot have just one size fit for all kind of a prescription. So there is a regional variation, and you have to understand what are their experiences, what are the needs of these beneficiaries. And based on that, you need to have that kind of a policy prescription.
Right, we can't have a one-size-fits-all approach. And food stamps is a relatively new system India is trying. What are some of the early findings about its strengths and weaknesses?
This is a whole question of credibility. Like you look at what is happening in GST, right? People, those who have to get reimbursement from the government, they are struggling to get it. So that the same kind of the psyche actually works when you look at all the the sellers. When it comes to, they say, okay, the food coupon, we provide the grains and so on, but what is the credibility that the government will give us the money in good time, right? And that's one of the issues that we are looking at from the seller side, that there is, because ideally, if you look at from the beneficiary side, their preference is not for the food coupon of the Bihar food coupon type, right? So where you can just only get it honored in the PDS shop. You can only, the preference is actually that what we have gauged, what we have assessed is actually for a food stamp, right? Which is going to be honored both by the private sellers as well as the PDS system. right? And that, Mamta and I, we have argued this in different kind of research components, that this actually really shifts the bargaining power in favor of the beneficiaries. Because if your PDS shop doesn't behave well, the PDS dealer doesn't really treat you well, you can go to the private sector and just get it, right? And if you buffer it up with kind of what is now ONARC, which is one nation, one ration card system, make it portable, make it divisible, get a food stamp kind of a program if needed, then that you are really drastically going to change the bargaining power in favor of the beneficiaries. What is there with the NFSA, with all these changes in prices and getting broader coverage of the beneficiaries? That's not the complete picture. That will not do the full trick. That's what our kind of element in the research is in this paper.
You argue that debates about delivery mechanisms are, quote, driven by ideology rather than facts and sound empirical assessment. What are some of these ideologies and how do they play out in commonplace discussions?
A lot of time just with looking at very small samples, small data, and some experiences, some expert opinions, and so on, people have been finding and formulating a prior that this works or this doesn't work. What we actually argue for, in order to make those choices, you need really rigorous big data analysis in order to, and taking into account the heterogeneity at the very granular level, in order to understand that what works and what doesn't work. We need like sound empirical evidence before making the choice, what should be optimal here, what should be optimal there, what form will be optimal here, what form will be optimal there, and so on.
As Divesh said, that you do this kind of research in some small area, or it is the whims and fancies of some one bureaucrat who sits and thinks that cash works better or PDS works better. And that's how the policy formulation actually works out. And in Indian context, especially, heterogeneity matters, and let's all internalize that. And you just can't be talking about cash as it is same for the woman. I mean, when we're talking about women in intersection with caste, class, the whole equation actually changes. Whether they would prefer cash or they would prefer PDS, they would prefer food coupons. So you have to account for that heterogeneity before you even decide for any kind of policy prescriptions. And to account for this really needs hard data. It really needs that kind of a rigor and an assessment to be done.
To what extent does your research have implications for other welfare programs?
We have to really take account on the heterogeneity. And because there is a heterogeneity, there is a need for needs assessment. Well, the question always comes up, so at what granular level can we go in terms of trying to assess what people want, what are their preferences, what has been their experiences, what have been their needs. So to start with, we can at least have it at an aggregate level in terms of trying to understand across these three elements of the PDS, what kind of product portfolio they want. And in product also, when we say it is three-tiered, what kind of product itself, whether rice, wheat, pulses, what variety of that product and what quality. These three things needs to be taken care of if we were talking about making a difference in the product portfolio. Second is the delivery mechanisms. So at the aggregate level, at least we can go and check whether what kind of experiences people have. It's a huge program that you're running. You're spending billions and billions of money on it, and you just can't go back and do a kind of a needs assessment. And if you look at even all this telecom sector, people will be calling us 100 times to know how did our phone work, what were the features that you need, is it really in sync with what we had promised. But this is a kind of a public program that we're dealing with. We're putting in so much money. We really don't go back and kind of check what kind of needs or experiences people have with this kind of programs. So the principles remain the same, that whether it is PDS, whether it's any of these poverty programs that we are running, you need to go back and check with their experiences and needs of the beneficiaries. And considering that this whole heterogeneity plays out in Indian context, and it's so complex, we have to internalize that. So that's the prescription that comes from our kind of research.
Basically, what we could just summarize that by saying that for all these non-market interventions, we need the market principles to work. The market principles work on creating demand, having a demand assessment. I mean, that's how markets work. Markets first assess the demand and they deliver accordingly. And so for all these non-market interventions, we need the market principles to work. I mean, that's what would be the take-home message, so to say.
Are there unanswered questions that you continue to investigate?
And that I'm really interested in trying to unpack this whole social network of the dealer. Here in our research, we just kind of touched base on terms of what his relationship is about with the Mukhya, for example. But we have not actually really investigated or examined this whole gamut of his social networks in terms of how he functions, why he functions the way he functions, because that's the last mile delivery problem, right? So everything hinges on the dealer.
Yeah, so there is one other part that we really want to do is basically to look at some of the really kind of low cost intervention, but that can have really first order impact. So, like for instance, Bihar has introduced this system where they were going to inform, and they put it on their website. They put it, and so everybody can access what is the time at which the grains were discharged to go to the dealer. So if the dealer, this is a very low cost intervention, but if the people have this information, they have this knowledge, they are made aware that the grains have been discharged, so they should now be getting it. Something along the line that Chhattisgarh did, right? And now if people can access that information, it can really empower them, and then the dealer cannot say, no, the grains have not yet come, so I'll open the shop like 3 days later, right? Because that simple information transfer can actually really empower people.
Right. Just moving to the last question of our show, and it's one that we ask all our guests, is what do you see as the role of academic research in furthering equity both inside and outside institutional spaces?
We want to try to look at, if we can get anywhere close to any kind of causal impact. Like when we talked about this whole information dissemination that is there, that if you put in information that the grains have been discharged, now you can access your grain, we can just send message to people. We want to see the impact of that. Then we need the kind of academic research done with methods that can do a much better job of understanding attribution.
That was a lot of rich and detailed information. Thank you so much for sharing it with us, Dr. Pradhan and Dr. Roy.
Thank you, Abhishek. It was lovely talking with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Our pleasure.
Governments usually design welfare schemes in a top-down manner, where the experiences and knowledge of those designing the schemes are prioritized, rather than those who the schemes are intended to support. Given that research usually follows this top-down method as well, it was refreshing to learn about how Dr. Pradhan and Dr. Roy's research listened to the needs of beneficiaries. What I found most interesting from what they shared with us was what Dr. Pradhan said about how when members from marginalized castes became PDS dealers, they replicated some of the discriminatory behavior that was otherwise associated with upper castes. To me, this revealed structures that require practices of domination and subordination, emphasizing the need to, as they mentioned, change incentives and encourage measures for transparency and accountability. Do read the entire article written by Dr. Roy, Dr. Pradhan and Dr. Sonkar that I've shared in the description of this podcast. Next week, we'll hear from Professor Sobhan George about the specific ways in which upper and middle castes provide subpar and discriminatory healthcare to Dalits. We learn about how power hierarchies embedded in the medical system complement caste supremacy, enabling a normalization of discriminatory practices. To make sure you don't miss out on that and our future podcasts, subscribe to us on your favorite podcast streaming platform. We are available on Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts. And since we're new to podcasting, we would love to hear from you about how we're doing. Send us an email at social@epw.in or ping us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter with your feedback. And if you like what we're doing, do share it with interested folks. Take care, and until next week.